There is a very specific kind of person who enters a room or a Zoom or a conversation, and you immediately feel it. You feel something shift. You get more present just by being near them. Callia Hargrove is just that kind of person. I was introduced to Callia through our mutual friend, Allison Matheny, from episode 5 of the podcast. Make sure you circle back to her fire episode if you haven't listened already. Callia is a brand consultant and strategist. She runs her own consulting firm called Backstory. She is a former Teen Vogue editor, a Capricorn, a 1-3 projector, a daughter, a community builder, and in her own words, a seer. Someone who is always also seeking to understand. But before I tell you too much more, I want to say something about this episode that I keep saying to people when I describe it. It's one of those conversations where you're ostensibly talking about one thing and you realize you're actually talking about everything. Work, womanhood, ancestors, seasons, the body's wisdom, the stories we were sold about who we're supposed to be by now, the radical act of just wearing the easy pants. Callia is 33. She is my youngest guest yet. And she is also ageless, which tells you something about what we're really tracking here. It's not age. It's not about arrival. It's about becoming more of who we came here to be. And the portal that midlife opens for us to do just that. One more thing before we get started. There is no monolith of women in their 40s or their 30s or their 50s or beyond or before. No single story of who we are or what we want. And I believe that every week, as I talk to women like Callia, like Allison, like Francesca, like Kate, like Clara, like all of them. And I hear how different our lives work, how different it is to be 33 or 44 or 66. And how it just makes more sense that even though we're different, and especially because so, we need each other's stories to help us make more sense of our own. That's what this podcast is here to do. I'm Catherine Zach. Welcome to the 40 portal, babe. Okay, Callia, let's go.
I feel like you're a person where when people meet you, like then you're just not far from their mind after they meet you. And so much so that, yeah, and when they meet other people, they're like, oh, you've got to meet Callia. Like, I feel like, because that is how I was introduced to you when our mutual friend Allison was like, oh, I just know who you need to talk to.
Yeah.
And then when I met you, which was virtually our first conversation, I was like, well, your presence is so resonant. It's so truly there, like all in and listening and receptive and grounded, that I would like, you make an impact.
Thank you.
You do. Like, are people like, am I right about this? Are people trying to connect you to other people all the time? Like, that's just the feeling I get about you.
Not no. Which my friends always make fun of me for saying that's not no, but not no. Yeah, I think I love connecting dots, but I also find that I'm often on the receiving end of dots being connected. And, sometimes I've had obviously times in my life where I've tried to force that and be like, okay, I got to connect these dots. And it never works, just being in the flow of kind of like, all right, this is when I'm meant to meet this person. Or, with a friend that we're speaking about, it was kind of like, oh, you're working with this amazing studio. Like, I love what they're doing. Let me just be connected. I don't know where it's gonna go, but I feel like, it might be cool to work with them. So yeah, I guess. I'll take it. It warms my heart.
It's good. Can we go back to what you just said about trying to force connecting the dots? Because I feel like that, speaking of resonant, like that really resonates with me because, it comes up again and again and again. I feel like it's a lesson I'm really karmically like trying to learn and relearn, and I forget all the time. Tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in, like, probably all the woo stuff, so astrology. I had an aunt when I was a kid that, like, was really into, like, star signs. My parents are not into that stuff, but she was kinda like my conduit to, like, learning about, "Oh, you're a Capricorn." I'm a very much a Capricorn, or, like, so all these things, and that led me to human design and all of this, and I think having been on that journey of trying to understand myself and the way that I'm wired, especially I think when I started the journey of entrepreneurship, like coming out of fashion, understanding that that didn't work for me for whatever reason, and being like, okay, why couldn't I shake it there? Or why didn't it actually fit for me? It's more than just like, I don't feel like I want to do this anymore. Like, where do I belong? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to be heading? And I think having that knowledge of myself really made me, I'm a projector, 1-3 projector. So, like, knowing that I'm not meant to, like, push things all the time, that sometimes it is just like, "All right, push here, but, like, pause there," or, just, like, trust in what's going on. That's been, I think, a lot of my journey, especially over the past few years, is just, like, trusting where I'm headed and with what's going on. I think, the world right now, I started my consultancy in 2020, so very polarized time. Things have only continued to get more polarizing. And, having put myself now in a position to use the word impact, I love that. To be working to create impact with brands and studios and different companies, it's hard sometimes just to see obviously what's going on and want to do more and, want to push forward, but also trusting in movements from the past and, being not okay with, but being able to just be in the now and try and create and figure out kind of where to be in this moment, and yeah, how to be with that. It's tough, and I think I have found a lot of peace and ability to kind of be in the now by just trusting where I'm at and trusting that sometimes, like, my mom often uses the idea. I'll probably speak about her a lot, because when I think of womanhood, she and my ancestors before me are the people that I always think about. So, my mom, especially in tough seasons, is always like, okay, maybe you're planting seeds, maybe you just can't see the growth right now, or you're not meant to kind of have a full bloom in this season. Maybe it is just like hibernation or these different things. And I think for me, that's really helped me to be able to live, but also it definitely has adjusted the way that I work. And even be in relationship with people. I think relationships have seasons. Everything is seasonal. So yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say one of the words that you used a little bit earlier on in your answer that I feel like you and I connect on a lot is the word pause. And then you got talking about seeds and seasonality and bloom. And I'm like, well, that is also something that we're connecting on. But the
Yeah.
pause is built into the seasons. I just know that
Yeah. Yeah.
you're living this. You're living this. I see you.
I am. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we initially bonded over. We were doing some kind of values work, and I think I would say probably over the last 6 months. I think, I've been on a journey with acupuncture. When I left fashion, I was really having a lot of bodily symptoms of, I would say, burnout and just exhaustion, a lot of stomach problems, and, I had kind of got them together on my own, but there was another season, probably around, like, 2022 in my life that was just really tough, and my therapist at the time was like, "Have you tried acupuncture? Like, just see," you know? And of course, it changed my life and changed the way that I live my life and how I think about, for instance, seasons. And, it started with the health stuff and then it just started seeping into every other area. So I started thinking about how I dress and like making sure my neck was covered and my feet and all these things. But then it started to I actually just did this thing called Values Bridge that someone had introduced me to. It's a framework by this woman, Susie Welch from NYU, Stern, and it essentially walks through your personal values, but then how they interact with each other. And one of my top values was work. And at first I was like, okay, interesting, but yeah, Capricorn makes sense. But just thinking about, okay, yes, if work is the thing, I'm not going to fight that, right? But how do I work in a way that sustains me and sustains my well being? And I came up with this kind of idea of like the seasonal map for myself of like, all right, yeah, in winter, we're not meant to be pushing forward in the way that we would in the spring because we live in a place in New York that is seasonal, which I love because you sort of don't have a choice but to live that way when it's cold and you don't really like want to go outside the same way. It's like, all right, yeah, I gotta kind of flow with this. So that seasonal map work wise has been really helpful, but also again in personal life and in relationships with others. And yeah, it really has been helpful.
Hmm. I love that so much. Okay, so I know who I'm talking to, but I wanna let our listeners in on who I'm
Yeah.
talking to here. So I'll move into my 40 portal questions. The first one is, what's your name? But go deeper. Is there a story about your name? Is there something with your identity and who you a like, and your name? Tell us your name and
Yeah. Fun, fun. I love questions about self-identification. It's usually where I start with clients, so it's fun to be in that seat. Yeah, my full name is Callia Hargrove. I usually, just go by Callia Hargrove, but my name does have a story. My parents, I am an only child, so my parents, I was their first baby, and when it came to naming, I guess they probably did the thing of looking at the books and everything, but they're like, "Yeah, none of these really are cutting it." So they were like, "Oh, what if we combine our names?" So my dad's name is Calvert. Funny story, all of the people except for one in his family have the initial CH. So we all kind of go by like different variations of CH. So CAH, I am. My dad's like CCH. My aunt was CDH. Like we all just kind of have those similar initials. But yeah, my dad's name is Calvert, and then my mom's name is Myrnia. So they did CAL, added an L, and took the I from my mom's name, and then my godmother named my middle name, so it's French. So yeah, it all kind of goes together in a cool way. But I love that question of story because it does, yeah, have a story. I think all things have a story, so it's always cool to be able to share. Yeah. And then I guess, yeah, identity-wise, I identify as a Black woman. I am born and raised in New York. I think that really is a big part of my identity. Was born in Queens, and grew up 45 minutes out of the city. So grew up kind of going back and forth to the city a lot. It really shaped my idea of identity and also just like racial identity. Just in terms of interacting with so many different people, I think one of the things that I love about the city is just kind of how many different people that you have access to. And my grandparents actually still lived in the house that my mom grew up in. So it's in this area called St. Albans in Queens. And it was this historically Black neighborhood. It had a lot of artists and jazz musicians that were living there at the time when my mom grew up. So it just was this really tight knit community. And that was really shaped kind of my idea, even of community building and just like being in community with one another. everybody on the block knew each other. My mom still is friends with a lot of those families that she grew up with, which was really different than how I grew up. So it was nice to always have my grandparents' house as this place that represented that for me, and that, I have such fond memories of summers where I, be with my grandparents, and, my grandpa would be like playing jazz on the radio and take me and my grandma around to like shop for watermelon, and this guy knew this guy. Like it just was such a rich community. And there's a mural that was there. My grandfather in his elderly years, right by the Long Island Railroad, he hand painted this like mural that they have there, and it's still there. And whenever I pass it, I think of him, and I'm just like, wow, it's just like such a representation of this beautifully rich neighborhood. So yeah, I think all of that definitely contributed to my way of thinking. My first preschool, for instance, was called the International Children's School, and I was with all these different kids from different racial identities, and we all were in the school together learning Tagalog from our Filipino teachers. So I think that really has shaped, again, my life, and how the course that I think I took, and my love for diversity and being around people from different walks of life and ability levels and all the things. So yeah, always feel corny saying this, but that's my backstory, and you know, yeah, what led
That's
me, I guess, to here. Yeah.
it's so good because like you kind of took your answer right into my second question. Um, yeah, and also if you want to share your pronouns, that's kind of part um, two of the first question. But and I want you to sit with this question, if you will, because I'm asking it from a really specific perspective. But your last answer just, I don't know, it's making me think about this a little bit differently. So my second question is like, how would you introduce yourself if job titles, accomplishments, and labels weren't part of your answer? But like you kind of did that. But I don't know, you're getting like I'm coming at this from a very specific point of view of us being kind of obsessed by our professional like resumes, leading with that. But you just blew me right out of the water. So I don't know. What else do you want to say?
I love that. And I think there's some more to add there. The words that came to my mind are seer and someone who wants to understand. Um, I think going back to human design, like being a projector, we see a lot. And that's been my role, I think, and it's my role sometimes in my family. It's my role, I think, in friendships. Like I'm often kind of seeing things, but something that I've had to learn is kind of like, am I seeing to understand, right? Like, am I seeing to judge? How am I using that gift of being able to see, right? And I think something about projectors is over the course of your life, you're usually trying to learn how to kind of hone that, or, know when it's the right moment to kind of share what you're seeing, or, be able to share that wisdom. So I think I'm always seeking to understand. I'm a really curious person, and always kind of just like noticing things and trying to understand how things are wired. And maybe we spoke about connecting the dots earlier, but sometimes often seeing ways to connect dots that maybe are under the hood, or might not be what's on the surface. But going back to that thing about backstories, like I need my consultancy that, just because I do believe that no matter what, everything has a backstory. There's a reason why this pen got created. I don't know the backstory, but there is one. There's a reason why my grandparents, for instance, decided to uproot their lives in North Carolina and come to New York during the Great Migration. That's part of my story. That goes back, you can go all the way back. But I think I'm always seeking to understand, okay, what is back? How do all these things intersect? Like, what is going on here that maybe we don't see, or could lead to just a different outcome or something like that. So yeah, I would describe it that way if I had to say. I love the idea of without your resume or your accomplishments, because I think in New York, and having grown up, before I founded my consultancy, I worked in fashion for a long time, went to FIT, did the whole kind of fashion path thing. And I think so much of that is who you know and what you represent. And I just remember my last kind of main big role in that space was at Teen Vogue. And I just remember I got to a point where I became Callia from Teen Vogue. And when it was time to leave, I thought I was going to this new shiny job. My body kind of was like, "You're not doing that. Like, you need to take a break." And I was like, "Wait, who am I now if not by my accomplishments and by being this high achieving person?" Like, how do I define myself? With not being Callia from Teen Vogue, it was almost like, "Okay, am I Callia from nowhere, like, or nothing?" And I had to be able to build that up in terms of understanding myself and my value outside of all of that stuff.
Well, I'm just like trying to connect the dots then too, listening to you speak, because, you know, in that values work, you're like, oh, work was one of my main values. But it also seems like the work that you've been able to create for yourself, it's so closely tied to like what I would call like your special gifts and talents, like your natural way of being in this world. And that is Ra kind of rare and pretty special. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it took a journey to get there. I think it's almost like, my body had the wisdom that I didn't have at the time because had I been able to just keep pushing, I probably would've. But it set me having to step away from this thing that at the end of the day, I still love fashion. I love style. I love all those things. But it was like, do I love it more than my well being? No. So I had to figure out, it's almost like in a lot of ways, I came back. My mom as a kid worked in social impact, and I often tell this story of being this kid that was like, coloring and listening to my mom. And I remember as a kid, all I wanted to do was work. Like I would see her facilitate, and I didn't know that I wanted to do that part of it. But I'm like, anytime I could like wear a little suit, my mom, I don't know what this suit was for, but I had a suit as a kid and I wanted to wear it. And I'd like take her little briefcase around, and like that's all I wanted to do was work. And I think what this journey has kind of been able to do for me in terms of having to leave this thing that I loved and redefine kind of, okay, I want to be in a job that creates impact, right? Like circling back to what I saw growing up, I didn't know that's exactly what I was doing, but it was kind of like, okay, this thing I love doesn't work for me anymore. And now having done all this kind of unearthing of my values, yeah, I can see why an industry of fashion doesn't work for me. It's built on exclusion. It's not built on seeing. It's kind of like, no, we don't see. We just, keep going, and all these sort of inequities and everything. We don't see them. And yeah, me seeing everything is kind of like, gosh, that must on paper that's so difficult. So it makes sense. I have this belief that we end up where we're supposed to be, even if we don't understand like where we're going in the moment. So I think, yeah, back then it was kind of like, okay, I know I just like can't keep shaking it in this industry. And it just became increasing. I'd be at certain roles and be like, okay, but what if we like do this diversity initiative? Or what if we try and, cast more people of color or people from these different backgrounds, or, someone with a disability? It'd be really cool to make this campaign more reflective of the world. I saw that in so many meetings, and, it just wouldn't go anywhere. Like, my bosses never, I would say, were like, "Don't know, we hate that idea," but it just never would go anywhere, and it was kinda like, "Okay." Like, I just don't wanna keep pushing this boulder up this hill when I'm seeing this maybe isn't the space for the talents, or the gifts, as you said. Like, it's maybe not the right environment. So, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I see a lot of similarities between our two stories because I don't even know if we've ever talked about this, but like I was a corporate litigator before I did this work. And in the same way, like my body was so not having it. And it was pretty extreme. And I was still able to kind of like push through it. And it felt like on the outside, it made no sense as to why I was leaving. On the inside for me though, I was like, I can't stay here. Like it makes no sense for me to stay. And there was like a lot of conflict and dissonance like between those two things. But I don't know, now 12 years later, I'm like, this is who I've always been. Like when you're talking about being a little girl sitting with your mom wearing your suit, it's like I I feel like I'm almost circling back to where I started and then forgot. And I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I think it's kinda, obviously we know of the body keeping score, like, in the sense of when it comes to trauma and things like that, but I think it also, to me, works in the other way of your body does remember, like, "Oh, yeah, that five-year-old version of me that for me, it was like, all I wanted to do was read and, like, discover new things and, you know, play with Polly Pockets and create worlds for them and stories for them, right? I'm still that same person. And so I think it is a lot of the journey, at least for me, has been also rediscovering like, wait, who was that person who, could spend X amount of time doing these things or felt okay in her body and wasn't like pushing all the time, did just rest when she was tired, Like sometimes it is just that. So yeah, I resonate a lot with your journey and that story of kind of like, yeah, you push till you can't,
Totally. And, like, thinking about maybe the opposite too, and I don't know, I haven't read as much about, like, the body keeping the score on, like, the other side, like, when you are in alignment, how, like, physical health can seem to click a little bit easier. Like, I feel better in my body 12 years older than I was, when I left.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Yeah.
seem like,
Yeah.
it has to
Yeah.
be connected too back the other way, I think.
Totally.
Um,
Totally. Totally.
will you tell us your pronouns, if you will, and then also how old are you and how old do you feel?
Ooh, great question. Okay, I go by she, her, pronouns, and I am 33. I turned 33 January 5th, so a few weeks ago. Oh wow, yeah, almost a month ago now. That's crazy. And I feel I don't know, the age 23 is coming to me, and I don't know where that's coming from. But I feel in my spirit, I think especially over the last year, I've shed a lot of weight. I would say in different I cut all my hair off, I left a relationship that just wasn't working for me, and I feel a lot lighter. Like I think also at 23 and obviously I'm sure everyone is hearing all that energy, the fire horse and all of that energy. There is something I think to that of just this like kind of just feeling and again in the midst of obviously awful things going on in the world, but just this kind of like forward movement. And I think if I think about that, yeah, at 23, I was feeling that as well. Like I was working in fashion, so different, but I think I felt on the precipice of kind of like things clicking at that age in a way that maybe I feel similarly at 33, but with like a lot more wisdom and a lot more knowledge about like who I am and the things that like really make me tick and probably the what do you call it? The spirals that I'll be working on and circling around probably for the rest of my life in terms of growth and all that. So yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. You're my youngest guest so far, and but you have, like, an ageless when I found out how old you were, I was like, "Wait, what?"
I get that a lot.
No, you do.
Yeah.
Like, look okay, I'm gonna share this story right now because I remember being, like, 25, and I met a woman there's a woman in one of my yoga classes, and we were both just taking yoga classes, and she came in one day and was like, it's my 33rd birthday." And then she said, "It's my Jesus year," which I had never heard before, right? Okay. I think it's what because Jesus died at 33, which is like, okay.
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
okay.
I
That took a
know.
different turn than I thought.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, tell me, because that's literally I've never researched it, but she's like, "It's my Jesus year." And I remember being like, "Okay." And then I also remember being like, wow, she felt like such a woman to me. And I felt like comparatively, like really kind of like still like little girlish in a way. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think my body is starting to feel more woman-like in certain ways of just filling out and I just remember so many insecurities as a kid, and my mom is wonderful. We are very different in size and stature. My mom is like 5'1" on a good day. I am 5'8", almost 9, and my dad is 6'5", so it kind of checks out. But yeah, they have a huge height difference. But I remember as a kid complaining to my mom about different things, never really about my height so much, but just like, "Oh, mom, I don't everybody in the family has this, like, their butt is bigger," or, this and that. I think especially as a woman of color, you're just often kind of judged in that way or self-judging in that way. And my mom would always say, "Your body is perfect for you." Like, if I'd compare to hers or be like, "Oh, mom, like, you have this and mine doesn't look," she'd be like, "You have the right whatever it is for your body." And I think it really helped me to, at any age, your body's always changing and shifting and growing, but always be like, "Okay, no matter what, like, this is what's right for my body." And that could be, in a season I've taken up running in the past year or two, and like, that comes with its own changes and shifts, and doing yoga more consistently, eating healthily, like all those things shift the form, but just knowing and having that core knowledge of like, no, whatever it is like what's right for, again, the season and like my own particular body, but I do feel like, oh, okay, I noticed some changes and differences. Also, like, all right, yeah, I went snowboarding last week after like a year of not doing it, and like the bruises and everything. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I can't just like jump myself up the way that I probably would have even like 2 years ago. So I feel it in that way, but I also do feel very girl-like, and I almost feel again that returning to girl-like, maybe from the shedding of
Yeah.
certain things, but just being like, oh yeah, I'm not a kid, but I feel kid-like. I feel like I'm able to laugh, and I have a lot of little ones that are in my life, and being able to, play with them still and enjoy, those aspects of feeling still young and youthful in that way, but also being like, yeah, I if somebody was to say though, "Would you like to go back to 23?" I'd be like, "No, I'm good." Like, I don't, or like 16 or any of the, I'm like, "No, I'd like to be where I am." And I would say most of my life have felt, I think when I was younger, I always wanted to be older. I remember that feeling of like, I can't wait to be an adult, like, everybody else. And hit the milestone. Like, I can't wait to drive. And then it was like, I can't wait to get a job and like all these things. But now I don't feel that. I feel like, oh, I like can't wait to just feel more and more settled in like whatever my life is. Yeah.
I love that.
You know.
Well, this is a question that like you've been almost dancing around. One of my questions is, what is one thing or many that your 10 years ago self, so you actually at 23, would be surprised to know about you today?
Ooh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I think like one of the things would be obviously that I'm not still working in fashion. I think all the energy and like I only applied to FIT, for instance. Like, I very much was like, oh, this is my path. Like, I figured it out. And I think also many people probably that ended up in fashion like were very influenced by like that MTV generation of like all the reality shows of that era, and like I very much followed that path. I like worked at Teen Vogue, and then like worked at, I was like, wait, was I just like manifesting this through these shows? That's like so wild. But I think that felt very much like the path in capital letters, THE, like the only path. And I'm kind of like, oh, I very much in a lot of ways returned to, I never would think, oh, I want to be like in a helping profession. Like, when I told my parents that I wanted to do that, most of the people in our family do work in helping professions, and they very much were like, okay, cool, we don't know anything about this, but like we'll help you, try to course out this journey. But like, I think myself of that era would be very surprised that like things are a lot simpler now. Like, I'm not going to the like fancy parties every night, and going to all these like big events and things. That my days are a lot simpler. I usually like wear very what we call in my family easy pants of some form, like every day, and like Birkenstocks, and like a nice top on top. But I think the simplicity would be very surprising. I actually, after like 10 years of living in the city, ended up coming back to my family home, and that was a big surprise. I don't think I ever would think that. I moved out at 19 and never would think that I would return to the town that I was in and want to be spending more time like here and even further upstate. But I've been unknowingly building a lot of community around that over the past few years. And then I think also that I'm like, would it be not married and like also like not having children at this age? I would never think that. And I think I've been really, especially again in this post kind of breakup era of my life, like enjoying dating. And I have like a few girlfriends that are also in the same kind of like era. And us being able to talk about dating, I think not from this place of like, oh, I need to be chosen or I have to again push it or force it. Just like, wait, what feels good? Or like, what are you learning about yourself through this journey of dating? And how are you choosing you? And just all these things. I think it's been really, really cool to not feel like being chosen is like the end goal, but really like being in the my therapist often uses this kind of idea of, you know, being a participant, not a passenger. And it's kind of like, yeah, this idea of being a participant in the building of a life and like choosing of a life partner versus okay, I just want this person to choose me or to like end this or reach this end goal of like marriage and partnership and children and the whole thing. But and I think I had a great model for that. My parents did meet when they were really young, but my mom before having children chose to put herself through social work school, and my dad supported her on that journey. He didn't go to Columbia with her, but they were able to kind of sort out this partnership. My dad is the one that does our laundry in the house. Like it was a very like, in terms of gender norms, I think especially for the time when they were getting together, like different. And I think it's created this foundation for me to be like, yeah, partnership is wonderful and amazing and it's definitely a goal, but like it doesn't have to be in this like super traditional or like 1, 2, 3, 4 like kind of way. Like it can be it might take some detours and turns. So I think myself of then would be surprised, but also really proud that that wasn't the central thing that like pushed everything forward, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And maybe this even dovetails into my next question, which is, or maybe it's something else completely. What is one narrative or one script that you were given about a woman at the age you are now? And does that map onto your life?
Ooh, a narrative. Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. Really great question. I think, yeah, that like, it's interesting because it doesn't, again, come from like my family of origin or, even how I was parented or anything. But just that, again, feeling of like the relationship has to be central or like, that your dreams and everything, even just, I think for me, especially when I was in my younger years, something about 30s and 40s and 50s and everything, like it was like, oh, that's like when you're like a woman, like your woman period at that age. And like even seeing my mom's journey, and she's in her 60s now, and I see her preparing for retirement and being like, this is a whole different journey. And my grandmother, and seeing how she even like in her later years, and my grandfather too, like they were able to carve out just whole new journeys in their 50s and 60s. My grandfather, growing up, well, not for me, but was an alcoholic in my mom's childhood and had this, we didn't as grandchildren even know that version of him. And I think it really set this idea of like, you always can remake yourself. You always are going to be on different journeys and sorting out different things. My grandmother became really religious when my mom was in her teens, and she was a completely different mom to them and grandmother to us because of that. So I think this idea that you're always becoming is like maybe the reframe of the narrative of like, there is no woman period. Like there's always like, evolving and things happening in womanhood and in the becoming of womanhood, which I don't think was what was, I feel like, sold to me like in the 90s and 2000s of like what a woman is. It's like, okay, like you have it all figured out. And it's like, no, there never is that really. Yeah.
I mean, uh, everything you're saying, yes, no notes except for to say, yeah. I mean, I really had that like you have it figured out. Like I don't know, like I
Yeah.
thought that there was
Right?
some moment where you arrive. And now I'm like, I'm 40.
Yeah.
I don't think there is one, but it's like the reframe
Yeah.
of like, because you just keep growing. Like that's really beautiful. I almost feel like, so I don't know where, okay, yeah, I'm gonna ask this one then. Like, is there something then, because I think what we're talking about too is like there's the bigger story, like kind of like, and there's a lot of different cultural narratives, but there are like dominant ones that are impacting us. And then there's the stuff that we're seeing in our home and our family, and sometimes those are the same and sometimes those are different. But what is one thing that you see now in like any larger cultural narrative about like women and women getting older and aging that just either like pisses you off or like or you just think it's not accurate? Is there anything
Yeah.
what comes to mind?
Yeah. Yeah. So much, Cass, so much. Like, every time I log onto Instagram. Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, like, as like a brand consultant person that's like really always studying that space and always again seeking to understand, I think it's been interesting just in general. This like for me, seeing this return to kind of like traditional however you wanna I know I would say the kids are calling it trad wife and all this, but I think I'm just like, "Oh, we wanna regress to that?" Like and again, I think I am of the mindset that whatever makes you happy, I always say, like, "If you like it, I love it." If that is what makes you feel amazing, cool, like, no judgment, but I think in terms of this, like, societal kind of idea of, like, again, connecting the dots of, okay, yeah, like, women, even just that, like, women want, women think, women did it. I'm like, there is no monolith of anything. I say that so much in my client work. I'm like, no community is a monolith, and women are not a monolith. Like, you don't think all the same and all want the same, and I think often, especially in media, we see so much of that, and I get it. It's what gets clicks and gets people to engage with things, and a lot of what we see in media now is meant to ruffle feathers and to make people be excited or upset or everything in between, but I think what we know now, I hope as, like, kind of a bigger knowledge is that no we're all different and our motivations are different and they also change, like, there is no monolith of women in their 40s blank, like, women in their 30s blank, like, we're all different, and what's my 33 may be someone else's 43, or their 43 might be my like, we all are on these journeys, and so, yeah, that really irritates me, that, like, grouping of things, and then, again, to kind of, like, especially right now, I think push us into sort of these regressive periods, and again, in my opinion, but, like, to be like, "Okay, yeah, women want this," or we're seeing this movement of try it's like, "Okay, is that everybody or just a selection of certain women that, again, if they want that, that's great," but that grouping of you should want this because you're at this age, or all women again want this or think this, or we all feel, when I think of even my girlfriends who mostly, again, some are closer to 40, some are, younger than that, whatever, but like we're all figuring it out in different ways. Some have been laid off after 10 years of being at a company and don't know what their life looks like. Or others, are ending relationships or newly married and trying to figure out, like, this is my person and I know I want to be with them, but like, what does that actually look like? Or I want to have kids and I don't have family where I'm at. Like, just all of these things. Like, none of our experiences, we all gather together and do things together, but our places in that all look different. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, when you said, like, opening up your phone, like, that honestly, it's like I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing, which is really fun and freeing. In a lot of ways, I don't know what I'm doing, but, like, with this podcast in particular, I think I I get so annoyed, like, when I open my phone and it seems so, like, two-dimensional, the things we're being shown to, like, pay attention to, and there's, like, 0 texture, 0 nuance, 0 differentiation, and I'm like, time I talk to the women that I admire the most, like our conversations are like big and deep and broad and like cool and sexy and hard. And that's why I want to do this, is just to have these conversations and have like a more textured storytelling, which I know is a concept that's really important to you. I just feel so compelled to be having these conversations and telling these stories, regardless of where they will go. Just having them feels like it's helping or freeing. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think something that has been like a healing balm to me, especially again, as things just feel more and more polarized and awful. And, you know, I don't know how you're feeling, but just I feel very helpless often. And even with having switched things up and working to create impact and doing all the things on paper, I still feel this helplessness every time I open my phone. It's like, what am I about to see now? But I think something that has been a healing balm is looking back towards the past and thinking about, other movements or other periods in time where people did have to sustain themselves through really turbulent and trying circumstances. And a lot of what kept people going is storytelling. And, I am descended, I come from a family that is from the South on both sides, which, you go back far enough, leads to slavery, of course. And so knowing what my ancestors, where they came from and coming over and not having control of their lives and all these things and how were they sustaining themselves, singing, gathering even when they weren't supposed to, like all these things. And I think having these conversations and being able to experience, share, and say, how are you handling this right now? Do you also feel helpless? Wait, how can we even just in our community gather people together or commune around a shared experience or table or whatever it looks like in your neck of the woods? But I think that is going to be the thing that in this moment, but just in moments in general, keep us moving forward is to be able to have experiences and share and say, wait, how does this land for you? Or what are you really afraid of right now? Or what's feeling hard? Or what's feeling great? Like that's important too.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that's like one of my final questions of this little series is like, so where do you look for wisdom?
Hmm. Love that. Love that. Love that. People around me for sure. I just before this call actually, my mom is one of my wisdom people just in general. I think a woman just has so much wisdom and her mother before her had so like just communities. But I think I was talking to her and I was like, what would you say to your 30-year-old self about just like your journey and where life is? I kid you not. Like we just were having, conversation, whatever. And I bless my mom's heart. Like I'm just always asking her these deep questions and be like, oh yeah, like, tell me about your experience over like coffee or something. And she's like, okay. like, but, she was like, I would just say like, there's no way that kind of like where you end up. Like the people that you knew at this era, she was talking about, having children and sort of being a new parent. And that in that moment, she had these friendships that were just like so tethered and like, your baby is hitting this milestone, mine too. And like we really rely on each other. And she's like, those friendships were amazing in that moment. And then, we moved away or we did different things and it just we weren't in community in that same way. But I still cherish those friendships so much. And it was just such a important moment in my life. And she's like, you'll have so many of those moments and you don't know what they will be. Like I know even in this season, I'm relying, I lost my grandmother over the holidays. And so I have been really relying on a lot of grief support. So whether that's like communities or just even talking with different people that have gone through that. And I think I gain a lot of wisdom in any area of life from people that have walked before me and have experienced things that I'm going through now because I think most things that we go through obviously like the background of the thing changes, but I think most things aren't new, like heartbreak, changing bodies, like just a lot of those things people have gone through before. And I think I find a lot of solace in like into people. Also reading. Oh my goodness. I think it's a James Baldwin quote about kind of like, you'll think you're going through something new and then you read and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. I butchered that, but I think that's what he was saying. But yes, I find a lot in that, whether that's fiction or even nonfiction, again, of past movements or things. But yeah, sometimes I just love like a rom-com book too, where I'm like, oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. This is reflecting something. So yeah.
I have not asked this question of anyone yet, but I am curious if you have an answer. Because, like, I find a lot of wisdom from books too. Like, I feel like books are some of my deepest teachers. And I think I've also, like, shared a bunch of book titles already in other episodes that I've done. So, I mean, in the nonfiction realm, I'm curious if you have, like, any that are just have been so impactful to you.
Yeah, yeah. Ooh, good question. I'm like not always the best with titles, but some are coming to mind. Pima Children. What is the one about when things fall
When
apart?
things fall apart.
Oh my God. I have listened on audiobook. I have written, like, I have a bunch of stuff in storage right now. I know there's like a copy in there that's like been just like highlighted through. I have another copy here. It's just like I just returned to it. So that's definitely one. There's another book by Louise Hay. I think it's called You Can Heal Your Life or something like that. Don't quote me, but that was given to me by like a PT person years ago. And it was like the first introduction to me to understand like the mind body connection and, just that sometimes what we think is going on isn't necessarily what's going on. So that has a lot of wisdom in it. There's another one that I've been reading for consistently for a year. It's from Mayon Vincent, and I think it's called like Meditations for People of Color or something like that. But every day it gives you like a different meditation to kind of just like think on. And I find that as like such great wisdom as like something I can look to each day. So that's one. I have so many. I feel like I'm always like reading a nonfiction book and trying to again learn things and but I think spiritual texts kind of like those really are where I just like always come back to and kind of you know just can rely on when things get hard to be like, okay, wait, like I'm good. But definitely the Pima Children one, that one, I'm like, oh yeah, that it's supposed to be hard. Like, sometimes you just need like the reassurance that like, oh yeah, life is not supposed to be a cakewalk. Like hard things are gonna happen, but you can make it through them, and there is a path forward. You just have to be in it. So hard though. So hard to just be in it.
And for that book, and I do this with a lot of my books. I will date when I read them, and sometimes I'll put annotation. I like to reread things. So I've been rereading When Things Fall Apart since I think August 2013 is like the first time I read it. And then it'll be like, and now I look back at the list every time I pick it back up. Oh, that's when that was falling apart. Or maybe it was 2011. Actually, I think it was 2011 because I know exactly what was falling
Wow.
apart.
Like, I remember.
So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so good. Okay, I'm gonna bring us into the 40 Portal book, into my book of wisdom, and I pulled a piece for you. I had two that I was playing with for you because again, you're my youngest. It's funny, I have a couple submissions from folks in their 30s in the book already, and they're all like 33 or 34, which is so funny. I know. I know. But I pulled a submission from one of my wisdom holders. And I'm gonna read it to you. And again, just whatever comes to you is what you can share. So she said, and I think she's 78. She said, I found myself feeling so weepy and emotional, trying so hard to not fall apart.
Oh, stop. The alignment. Yeah.
I know. Oh my God. Or somehow act out. Then I opened a post from a dear friend about Lionsgate, and she had written this to me back at the end of July. So Lionsgate, I believe, is the date 8/8, August 8th, is this
Yeah, the
Lionsgate
portal.
portal.
Yeah.
And she said, so now I remember I have to first become powerfully calm. Trying to create awakening and learning from an agitated, prickly place is not going to work.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I'm like, as I see the kids doing. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. 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 Prickly place. Oof. That resonates. Yeah. Yeah. I've been working with this like concept and thought over the past few days of this like wise self, and especially when it gets into like mental loops, and choosing to kind of move from this place of like wisdom and okay, yeah, like maybe my unwise self would like, I don't know, pop off on this email or like whatever it is. But it's kind of like, okay, how can I embody this self? Not all the time because that doesn't exist, but like even being able to understand and notice like, oh, I'm in a prickly place, or I work with this wisdom of points a lot. And for instance, I look at and write out the day and I'm like, oh, all these things cost like 50 points for me. I'm not going to have energy at the end of the day. So let me readjust, but it took so long to get to that place of understanding of, oh, it's important to know what's going on under the hood. Right. And I think when I hear that prickly place thing, I'm like, yeah, knowing your prickly places is so important to be like, wait, where am I operating from? What's going on here? So. Yeah, I love that. I love that that's, like, also, as you said, one of the oldest entry or someone, on the other end of the spectrum. I think that's really cool.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
What is your point thing? Because I feel like you just kinda glazed over that. I'm like, "That sounds helpful." What gets you to 50 points, and how many points do you have in a day?
I mean, and I just make these numbers up, but a few years ago, I think when I started my business, I was having a lot of feelings about productivity and feeling like, "Oh, well, I don't have a boss now, so I have to be, like, 2 times more productive." I wasn't consciously thinking that, but my actions were operating from that place. I'd work on the weekends. If I was on vacation, still check, like, just do the things, the things of like the corporate person that like is highly successful in whatever, whatever. And my therapist at the time was like, you keep saying you're burnt out. So what if you thought about your day? I had a lot of issues with like overscheduling. So, I'd feel like, all right, I gotta like pack this in, but do da, 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 which was the motion of when I was working in corporate. But she was like, you can do something different. So why don't you maybe think not in that tone? That's my own. I can hear like the tone change, but she wasn't saying it to me that way. She was like, maybe you can think about, moving from a space that is a little bit just kinder to yourself and not feeling like you have to be productive. But if you want to do XYZ thing in a day, know that it may cost you points. And then you may not have the same energy for doing a full routine at night, for instance. You might just want to brush your teeth and go to bed if you've done 5 calls in a day or something like that. And it's something that I've shared with so many people around me because I think a lot of us get into those loops of I feel like I have to, or why am I tired, or this or that. And it's like, yeah, you're tired because also luteal phase, for instance. I'm
Mhm.
like working with negative points on days like that because I now know I'm just already tired. I'm not going to probably sleep well, or it's made me be able to have this system to also communicate with other people like, no, I'm tired, or I just did these 2 things today, like I don't really, can we reschedule for like later in the week or something like that when I'll have more energy. I don't necessarily say to other people like I'll have like only 20 points that day, but at least for me it gives me this system where I can be more embodied. And since then, I have definitely been less tired, less like, feeling just like I'm doing all the things, like I'm able to kind of, catch myself in times where probably I would have just again kept pushing or kept the thing moving forward when, no, like I can pause, Yeah.
You brought us right back to the push and
Yes.
pause. It's totally full circle.
It's just always there. Always there.
So full
Yeah.
circle. Oh my gosh. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. One at the beginning, one at the end. You're so yourself through and through. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for the space, Kath. I think when I think again of people around me that have so much wisdom, you are always one of the first people that come to mind. And being in this space, especially, I can't wait to hear all the future episodes of, and hear just people's different versions of becoming around 40. I think it's so cool. So I'm really grateful to be here and to have been able to have this conversation in this space, this special space. Yeah.
Respectful. Thank you for being here. Thank you,
Mm.
Callia.
What a conversation. Okay, last night I was at this last night. I was at this very popular, very quintessential Hudson Valley outdoor restaurant cidery farm near our house. And, once the weather finally starts to warm up after the long winter, everyone comes out of hibernation. You know how it is. You end up places and you run into people. And last night I ran into Francesca. Hello, episode 6 of the 40 Portal. Go listen to that very tender conversation if you have not already. And she started talking to me about the show, about the podcast. And then another woman came over who had been listening, and we were all just standing there talking about the episodes, but really about the stories, about the women, about you, about what is landing, and how when we hear these stories, we just get to crystallize our own. And I thought, this is why I am doing the podcast. It's not the downloads. It's not the metrics. Women in the actual world going, did you hear what she said about that? That was mine too. That was me. That made me feel less alone about that shit. Callia said something in this episode that I want to leave you with. This kind of storytelling is a healing balm. And that looking back at the big stories too, of the movements and the people who came before us and their little stories and how they sustained themselves through really turbulent times. Through song, through story, through gathering. This reminds us that even though it's crazy right now, none of this is new. People have made it through before, and we will too. Couple things before I go. There is one spot left in the June retreat. It's 3 days here in the Hudson Valley. It's intimate. It's for women who want to dismantle the stories that don't fit anymore and write new ones together with each other, with the time and the space and the place and the grace to actually drop into them. To that grounded calm, to that deep calm, right? Where the truth lies. If that's you, if that's your spot, come get it. The link is in the show notes to apply. And if this episode or any of the episodes gave you something, a one-liner you're already using in your conversations, a spark of a story, a moment where you thought, oh, thank God, thank goddess. I want to hear it. Leave a rating, leave a review, leave a comment wherever you listen. Tell me what's resonating. Tell me what you want to go deeper on. I read everything, and I'm going to get better at responding because this conversation with you is meaningful, and I genuinely can't wait to hear from you. Okay, thank you so much for simply being here. Thank you, Callia. Oh, Callia. This is the 40 Portal podcast, babe. I'm Catherine Sack, and I will see you right back here